Okay, here's a question. Well, actually, just a reminder, hit chat, choose
Mhm.
either all panelists and attendees or everyone. Let us know what's going on in your area. And I figure we have probably 2 minutes or so before we have to officially get started. I've sort of wanted to ask the people that are sort of our early joiners what they think about this. Have you seen like all the news over the last couple of years with UFOs and whatnot, and the
Yeah.
Pentagon actually sort of came out and authenticated this one video. This is just one case with this like pyramid like thing that's sort of flying through the air over like our the U.S. Navy warships, and no one quite knows what it is. And like the Pentagon actually came out and said the video is an authentic video taken by I think our U.S. Navy personnel. Um, like I don't know. Do you have a thought on what the heck this is, Mike?
I mean, if the Navy can figure it out, yeah, I probably am not going to know what it
So I would be curious. I figure there's a couple of
is.
potential options, and maybe we could kick things off while we're still just sort of waiting with a fun little poll. What do you all think this is? And maybe not just that one particular one, but there's been a few over the last few years. There's that Tic Tac video, that Tic Tac thing as well. There's that pyramid thing that we just showed. But what do you think generally these things are? Is it an alien vessel that is not of this earth? Is it some sort of an advanced drone from another country? Is it just a light reflection or some sort of optical illusion? Or is it something else entirely? And for those of you brave enough, you do have chat too, and you could offer up your own thoughts as well. But I sort of think of it this way, right? If if there's any reasonable chance that it actually is that it's some sort of an alien craft, how is this not the biggest story of all
Bigger
time,
news.
right? I mean, like even if it's like a 1% probability, wouldn't that make this a really
Yeah,
big news
that's true.
story?
I mean, maybe not this year. Maybe, if it was any other year, maybe.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Uh, so I don't know if you can see the results of polling, Mike. Where do you think, knowing our audience, people ended up landing?
I mean, nobody in the chat has said aliens. Everybody says, yeah, weird. Just kind of like all of. Well, somebody said that they think we're not alone. Space
Well, I mean,
junk,
I
a
guess
slice of pizza, debris.
we have to make it about food somehow.
Yeah, a
I guess the
giant
other
lime
option, and maybe this
gumdrop.
is in none of the above, is for those that are really into this, is it a planted story to distract us from other things? Who knows? But what percentage do you think said alien?
I'll say 10%.
Mark, any guesses? How many of us guessed alien? Oh,
Oh.
you're muted, Mark. He was in kid protection.
One in six. I would say 16%.
Okay, not a bad guess. And what do you guys personally think?
I think it's probably, yeah, like a light reflection or a weather balloon or something like
I said alien.
that. Wow.
So, yeah, so most said light reflection. Enough of us said alien. I think this is probably of public interest. And I don't know, the theory is like you don't want aliens visiting us, right? Because the odds of them being benign and nice and wanting to help us are probably pretty low, right? If you develop the technology to go out and sort of explore, you're probably going for places that will help you, as resources dry up in your home planet. So, like, you're probably not buzzing around the universe just looking for civilizations to help. So, yeah, okay. Anyways, with that, I think we need to get started. Mike, what is going on in the world?
All right, let's get right into it. So, I mean, I don't want to make this a bigger thing than it is. I feel like a lot of times, two people on Twitter start doing something, and all of a sudden the story is, people are doing X. But I mean, this was reported in Vice, and then from there, it kind of took on a life of its own, which was this news story about people who are trying what they call high meat, which is raw meat that they age for months and in some cases years, and then they eat it and they feel like it gives them some type of euphoric experience. And they talked to a dietitian. The dietitian said, yeah, there's the possibility that this bacteria is fermenting and that you could get a little bit high off of this meat. I mean, to be sure, it is not safe. You should not do this. We are not recommending that anybody do this. But I mean, and I have to say, I mean, if you look at it, so it's actually a stock photo in the background because the photos from the actual article were so disgusting. I think this is the only time that I've actually gagged researching something for these webinars. I mean, like they're truly heinous looking.
And who was doing this?
I mean, I don't know, random people. Although it is kind of, so there's a couple YouTubers who I'm sure are just doing it for likes. But those videos they're unwatchable to me. The descriptions of the meat themselves are just disgusting.
Huh, there you go. Okay, so on to the next one.
I mean, I feel like every webinar we have to talk about, a new free thing that we're offering up to get a vaccine. I think a lot of people probably saw that Ohio is going to have a lottery where for 5 weeks, they're going to give away $1 million a week if you get the vaccine. But New Jersey was doing the shot and a beer program where you could get a free beer this is actually a limited list of the breweries that were participating. A bunch more have signed on to it. But you can get not only a vaccine, from these breweries and a beer, but they're doing it at the breweries themselves. So there was an interview with, I think it was somebody from the health department on Slate the other day, and she said it was incredibly popular. They went to the brewery, they could answer questions. They would go table to table and say, do you want to get vaccinated right now? And I think we are at that point now where we're seeing, younger consumers who, maybe weren't going to the United Center, like here in Chicago, and making,
well, if they really want to make a push to get the really young people vaccinated, wouldn't you sort of like do this and make it okay for the under 21s to get a free beer as well? Right?
Well,
it's not
Chicago,
just valid beer, that you can get one even.
Yeah, Chicago, they've talked about doing it at festivals. They're doing it at places like Lollapalooza this summer.
Yeah.
That's great. Whatever it takes, right?
Yeah. Oh, this one is a weird one. So this is a company out of the UK. It's called Exmoor Caviar, and they are a traditional caviar company. So they typically make sturgeon caviar. But the head of the company said he kind of sees the writing on the wall that people are getting a lot more concerned about animal cruelty. And so they are investing in a company that will actually create cell-grown caviar. And so they are producing products already, actually. So some caviar products are used in makeup and they're used in pharmaceuticals. So they already sell to those segments, but now they want to create a product that's actually consumer facing. They think it's going to come onto the market in the next couple of years. And they said it's actually a lot easier. It's easier to kind of grow that little bit of caviar than it is to grow a whole animal. So for them, it's kind of like a no-brainer.
In the chat, Matt Martinez called it caviar. I like
that. I had to put it in because this is the same company. And I mean, I tried to find out if this is actually real or not. It was launched last month, and I feel like anything that launches in April, you're not sure if it's an April Fool's joke or not. But I think this is a true product. So they call it Dog VR. It's the same company, but it's dog kibble that they coat in the same, it's like roe oil. And that roe oil is so rich in omega-3 fatty acids that it's supposed to be really good for your dog's coat. So they're selling this dog VR for your pet.
This looks extremely expensive.
Yeah, I forget what the price was.
It
was 50 pounds a tin.
I know it's not always the best food, but sometimes we get like the healthiest, but sometimes we get like those single serve, wet food packs for our dogs because they love them so much. Mm-hmm. Then you start thinking about it. I'm like, that stuff actually, for its size, costs more than the majority of stuff I eat.
Oh myself. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, here we go. Let's eat them.
Oh yeah, cicada season. So I mean, I feel like every time there's a new brood that comes out of the ground, we have all these stories about should we eat them? Are we going to start eating them? And there's always going to be that certain percentage of the population or a couple of chefs who do experiment with them. So these are just a few articles. If you start searching, there's a million out there. There's one chef, he's a private chef in Washington, D.C., where they've already started coming out, and he's going to do a private dinner series. Where I think he said he's going to put them on pizza. He's going to do some cicada sushi at some point. So he is cooking with that. He says they don't really have a taste at all. It's kind of whatever flavor that you put on the cicadas. Most people recommend frying them because it really gives it that, crunchy quality. There was, you could see one of the headlines here. There was a restaurant in DC as well who actually shut down their patio in anticipation of cicada season because they said something like one of the insects can create 100 decibels of noise. So if you have this incredible brood of them coming out, it's just untenable to have that patio out there.
How big do they get?
The actual cicadas themselves?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
I don't know. They're good size.
I mean, so are they supposed to be like juicy when you bite into them, or do you fry them up and get all the moisture out? What do you?
So yeah, I mean they definitely recommended frying them up. The weird thing about it is like they say you should get them really young. Like you should actually go harvest them at night because they don't have these really hard exoskeletons yet, which is like too crunchy in your mouth. So I don't know. Like this is another thing that maybe don't start researching. But
I feel sort of bad for them, and they're like waiting like 17 years to finally emerge and immediately get served up as food.
Oh, if you live by them, you won't feel bad for them at all.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I know we're going to talk about, virtual brands and ghost kitchens in a little bit, but I mean, there's just a new one every day. But this is an interesting one from Pepsi. So they've launched these Pep's Place pop-up restaurants all across the country that will be active for the next 30 days. And the interesting thing about them is they're called beverage forward restaurants. So you actually order your beverage first, and then they auto-populate the menu based on which Pepsi product that you've chosen.
So these are actual physical locations?
So I was looking them up. I don't believe so. I believe they're operating out of existing restaurants, but I couldn't find exactly which brands or restaurants they're operating.
But can you actually walk up to one, or
I don't think so.
Strictly
yeah,
on,
I think
strictly online.
Strictly online. Yeah, exactly. And so some of the examples where you order a Pepsi Zero Sugar, and then they bring up a chicken Caesar salad because that's the perfect pairing for it.
That makes sense.
And this was great. This was such a good idea. So this was from Instacart, and I give credit to Gretchen, the Specialty Food Association, for sending this over. But Instacart created this, and they are calling it the Pudding Pack Index. And they've looked at all of the various products that are sold over Instacart and figured out which ones correlate the most with getting back to normal. And it tends to be anything that you would put into a kid's lunchbox. Is a really good indicator that we're getting back to normal. So on the next slide here, you can actually see the index itself. It's 10 different products. It's things like pudding packs, granola bars, yogurt, things like that. And so you can see, April 20th, a couple weeks after those first stay-at-home orders were enacted, these, packed lunch items were almost 50%, an almost 50% decrease in the level of ordering those items versus like pre-pandemic levels. And now that vaccines are up, you can see, we're almost getting back to that normalcy. And it's not just about,
looks really similar to the restaurant traffic that we've been monitoring.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And it's not just about, getting back to schools too. I think the story here is, once kids go back to schools, it probably means people are going back to offices to some extent. People are going on vacations again. This is a new product that launched on Indiegogo just a couple of days ago, and they've already reached their, I think it was a $25,000, that they were trying to get. And I think they're at $35,000 already. But this is called Cooksy. And so we've seen some of those pans that, the pan itself actually tracks what you're cooking and, sends information to your phone. But this is a camera that you put in the hood above your stove, and then it tracks anything that you have on the stove. It tracks the heat. It actually tracks what's in the pan. And then it'll say, it's time to flip it over, or the pan is hot enough right now that you can actually put the food in there. And I'm sure a lot of people listening right now, have customer bases that they don't necessarily feel comfortable cooking that. I know seafood, we've seen a lot. Consumers feel like, they don't know how to cook it correctly, or they overcook it.
It's too risky if you mess it up.
Exactly. It is expensive. I think it's like $400 for the base level and $500 for the pro level.
So, okay, it can detect the heat of what's being cooked and tell you when it's time to flip that burger.
Yeah,
what
it
else
actually
can it do besides tell you if it's time to flip a burger?
It pretty much that's pretty much, it tells you when to put it in the pan, and it tells you when to flip it over.
Okay, well, it's a step, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think there are companies that are trying to do more robotic stuff with both restaurant prep and home prep, And this might just be one of the sensors that fuels a lot of those other more mechanical
And there
things.
are, yeah, there's some back of the house for the food service industry products like this already.
But if you pair this with some apparatus that actually does that flipping automatically, then that's totally a game changer, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, the interesting thing too is they said that it learns over time what you like, so it actually learns how you like to cook things, and then the next time you cook a steak, it will learn that you liked it, medium rare, and it'll
But if you're
recommend
just
that
a
you do
bad
that.
cook, it too will learn to be a bad cook.
And that, I mean, that might be the case. Yeah, I mean, maybe you like well done meat. And then, I mean, of all the things we're talking about, this is probably the story that people listening have heard the most over the past couple of weeks. But it's, we can't not talk about it, which is that Epicurious, one of the largest recipe websites out there, announced that they are not going to publish any more beef recipes anymore. And actually, they're not going to include beef recipes even on any of their social media accounts. For environmental purposes and sustainability initiatives. The interesting thing is they actually enacted this in 2019, and then it was kind of a slow ramp up, and they're only really announcing it right now. So they are keeping the beef recipes that were previously on the website on there, though.
I feel like if that's the goal, the answer is to give people more options and not to remove options. But
When
I guess sometimes it's easier to remove things, but I don't know if that solves anything.
One, on a related note too, I mean, we are seeing this to some extent from chefs too. So Chef Daniel Hum from 11 Madison Park, which is, one of the best restaurants in the world, he announced when the restaurant reopens after the pandemic that they're not going to put any meat products on the menu at all. So Epicurious was just beef. 11 Madison Park is no meat products at all. So
Were they the
fish,
place that
seafood.
shifted to doing like food lunches for first responders?
They did, yeah. They had a food truck.
Yeah.
And it's not vegan. They're not going vegan, so they're still going to serve honey and things like that. And this, I wish, and it might exist in Chicago, but this is a great idea. So it's a company called Flash Food. And the reason it came up in the news is because Stop and Shop is doing a test with this company at some of their shops in Worcester, Massachusetts. But it's basically at a supermarket, if some of the items are about to expire, they go into this Flash Food app, and then you can order them through the app. You walk into the grocery store, and then you can get those items. You can see behind them, they have the little cooler right there. And you can pick them up. I mean, here in like an urban area like the city, on my way home from work, in normal times, obviously, this would be awesome. I would stop in, get that milk for a lower cost. Just kind of a great
It's not
idea.
just produce, it's other items too.
Yeah, anything, with an expiration date, basically.
So how long is a cucumber good for?
I mean, if anything goes bad.
Yeah, interesting. One day it becomes that high meat if you wait long enough.
Well, yeah, really. Well, we had recently done some research for our 2021 trend report where we asked consumers, what they were concerned about. And 68% of consumers said that they are concerned about, single-use plastics, which I think, get a lot of the attention. But actually 72% of consumers said they're concerned about food waste, which I think is an area that maybe we don't give enough attention
Yeah.
to. And then this one, so this is in the Los Angeles Times. This is just such a cool company. This is called Girl and Doug Farm. So he was actually a chef previously, and then he opened up this farm in California. And the idea was that he knew fine dining chefs were really interested in having some of these really out there, cool, crazy produce options. So he started growing them. He was selling to Michelin-starred restaurants across the country, and then the pandemic hit. So now he actually also sells boxes, and you can order them at home. And the types of produce he has are just unbelievably interesting and fascinating. You can see on the next two slides here, there's two that he's growing. So this one here, it's a Peruvian root vegetable called oca. And it took them 3 years of failures. They, really wanted to bring it to market here, but it, kept going bad. And they finally think they've cracked the code. And so he describes it as, I want to get the description correct. Imagine a baked potato with a dollop of sour cream sprinkled with MSG, but all like in this potato where the root vegetable itself. And the different colors have different flavors too. So a lighter one, he says, has a little bit of a taste of an apple, whereas the darker one tastes a little bit like a sweet potato.
Are these essentially, by definition, GMOs?
No, well, I mean, I don't know what he's doing, but no, I think a lot of the ones that he's growing, he actually is just bringing seeds back from the countries where they grow it normally and just seeing if they'll grow here in the United States, or hybridizing them, with things that we already have here. And this is the other, I mean, this looks a little bit like spider eyes, so I don't know how delicious it looks to people. But this is called an ice plant. And so it's a succulent that you can eat. And he says, just put a little bit of salt on there. And then when you eat it, it bursts in your mouth. It almost reminds me of that, like the caviar, the lime caviar that you get. And just like really interesting, cool produce options. One of our 2021 trends to watch was this type of bespoke produce that we were seeing, which we see on the consumer side, like the Del Monte pink glow pineapples and the rosé strawberries and things like that. But as plant-based cuisine continues to grow, on the chef side, we see, a real interest in these interesting options.
So for anyone watching who's interested in trying this, how do they get some of this stuff?
That you can actually just, but I mean, and we don't get a kickback from this farm or anything. You could just go to girlanddougfarm.com and order it.
Girl and Duck?
A girl and Doug.
Doug. Girl
Yeah,
and
so
Doug.
like you dug the vegetable up.
Got it. Mike, thank you. You're going to stick around with us and maybe add some thoughts as we go. So I feel like we maybe sped through these two slides a little bit too quickly last time, and I want to spend just a couple of quick moments as a follow-up today. This is that COVID tracker that we've been doing for over the last year on one, how concerned people are around COVID, and two, are people avoiding eating out? And as you can see here, levels of concern have basically sort of stabilized at a reasonable level. But the real insight is that that definitely avoid eating out number as of the end of April dropped to its lowest level since the start of the pandemic. We'll have updated stats on this in the weeks ahead, but I think you're going to continue to see that number finally really continue to decline to much, much lower levels than we've seen historically. And I think, Mark, you noticed something interesting in the data too that we aren't showing on this slide, right?
Right, and it was kind of the data point that I've been waiting for, where the other thing that we measure is people that respond to the same question. I have no issues eating out, and for the first time since March 18th of 2020, the folks who say I have no issues dining out are not the majority, but they outnumber the other options. So by the barest of margins, though, 34% of people say I have no issues dining out, but that's more than the people that are definitely avoiding restaurants. So the numbers have kind of finally inverted, and it was kind of the one that I've been waiting for.
Yeah, and we're seeing that in the restaurant traffic information that we've been monitoring as well. So it looks like things are starting to get pretty healthy from a traffic level, which takes us to an entirely new related topic, which is lots of restaurants are trying to hire people and not having the simplest of time filling those slots. So you probably read in the news that there's big labor shortages in many industries, with restaurants being one of the lead ones. And I guess there's a lot of competing theories right now as to what's possibly driving that. You can see all the different headlines. It's a perfect storm. Restaurants survived the pandemic. Now they can't find workers. How the labor shortage is squeezing full service restaurants. In particular, there's just no one to hire. No one's showing up as an applicant. And I guess the three major theories as to what could be driving this are one, is it that the enhanced unemployment benefits, which I think are $300 a week still right now, are discouraging or disincentivizing people to come back into the workforce? Is it that the pandemic has, reset workers' attitudes around what fair pay actually means, and that they don't want to come back and work for the historic types of wages that the industry is paid in some cases? Or is it just that so many places, opened up all at once and so many new positions, came back all at once, that even if you didn't have these other two things, it would be almost impossible to fill all the slots because it's too much too fast? So I guess, at risk of courting a little bit of controversy, I would like to see what this informed group thinks. So let's fire up a little bit of a poll and tell us what you think is the primary primary cause of the current restaurant labor shortage. And we're not going to try to get political about this, but you don't often get a group of people that are in the industry, know the industry, and have sort of that expert's eye view. So I'd be curious to see what people think. So without revealing your own personal thought, as we don't want to probably do that, Mark, Mike, do you have any guesses as to what this group is going to think is the primary cause?
So far in the comments, I think that we're seeing more people pointing to the expanded UI benefits. But keep in mind, I mean, those only go through September.
September, yeah. And I think you have some states that are trying to stop that earlier now.
Yeah, a couple have.
Yeah, so we're at a minute. We've had several hundred people submit a vote, and you're right that about 2/3, about a little over 60% of us think it's primarily UI. 22% think that it's just we have new attitudes about what fair pay means, and others say it's too much all at once. So it's probably a mix of all of these things, and we're not certainly saying that any one person or any one opinion is more correct than the others, but it is an issue right now. And
A lot of folks are saying childcare in the comments too, which I think is a huge part of it.
Oh yeah.
I've seen a lot of people that have left the workforce because they had to take care of families, take care of kids, homeschool their kids. So we still haven't solved for that in any way during the pandemic either.
Yeah, for sure. Look, if we're roaring back quickly, there's sure going to be some hiccups along the way. Right? Okay. All right. So I want to offer up a quick disclaimer before we get into this next section. The next couple of slides I show you are not, data essential data. They're mostly collected from CDC, and I myself, and I think neither Mark nor Mike are experts on this particular data, but I am trying to interpret what I'm seeing in the data in a way that I think a logical person would. But if any of you find fault in what we're observing, by all means, feel free to offer up comments in chat. So that is the disclaimer for the next couple of slides. And here we go. So this is CDC reported data on COVID new cases. Each one of these lines is basically a state, sort of a big mishmash of things. And this really sort of is a little bit biased because, there's going to be more new cases in bigger states, which is why you have California and Florida and Texas being, taller lines overall. But we wanted to sort of explore this a little bit more, and specifically relative to something we talked about a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago. And this goes back to the end of February, actually early March, I think March 2nd. There was a declaration from Texas and Mississippi that we're going to open all the way back up, lift those mask mandates, and we're going to see what happens. I think we said back then on that webinar that this will make for a very interesting, at a minimum, experiment where you have essentially a control group, which is other states or the history of what's happened independently in Texas and Mississippi. And then you have an experimental group, which is what happens after this policy is enacted. And we actually asked in a poll on the same webinar on March 4th, so a little over 2 months ago, compared to other states, will Texas experience a dramatic increase in COVID cases in the coming months? And the responses that we got from this very group, all of us that have been part of this webinar, is that 72% of us thought the answer is yes, we'd see a dramatic spike, and 28% of us thought the answer would be no. And I wanted to maybe just sort of, we could sort of scorecard how we did versus what the current data shows. But also this becomes a matter of, hey, as we're starting to get out more and other states are basically starting to lift these mandates, should we expect to see a further rise in cases or anything, or is it going to be a little bit more smooth sailing? So the way that we thought it made sense to look at this, if the question at hand is, does lifting a mandate lead to a dramatic increase in cases. We basically want to look at what happened in each state prior to the beginning of March, and then what happened in each state after the beginning of March relative to its history. So we indexed everything and we said, hey, let's look at how many cases each state has had as of February 28th. And that'll be set as an index baseline of 100 for that state. And as each day moves on, and we did this all the way through, just a few days ago, May 7th, how many cases does that state have now, and where does that compare to that previous index for that state? So that's sort of basically adjusted with the fact that some states are bigger and some states are smaller. We're just comparing to each state's individual history. And by that measure, US wide, nationwide, we're at about a 115 index versus the beginning of March, meaning that there's about 15% more cases as of May 7th, which is just a few days ago, than there were at the start of March. And you can sort of see where some of these lines played, right? So the ones that are sort of higher up, Vermont's at a 154, so there's about 54% more reported cases in Vermont, a few days ago than there were at the start of March. Michigan's at 149. Maine is at a 142. And if the first question is, what's going to happen in Texas, for instance, where would we think that Texas would fall on this chart? I think Mike, you've already seen these slides, so makes no sense to quiz you or ask your opinion because you already know the answer. But there's Texas at a 110, a little bit below the US average. And then there's Mississippi at a 106. And then you can sort of see where maybe some other interesting states are. I know we have a lot of folks that work out of Chicago for us. Chicago, Illinois is at a 113, a little bit below the US average. Florida is just a shade above the US average. New York, DC, both still just a shade above the US average. And relative to their histories, Oklahoma and California have actually done the best. So as, let's say, some of the rules around masking and other distancing start to erode, hard to say. Again, big disclaimer, it doesn't feel to me like it's going to lead to a dramatic increase in outbreaks or anything, right? If we didn't see that in a state as large as Texas or Mississippi already. So that's probably good news, right, as we move forward. Okay, some quick stats. Self-reported, about 39% of consumers, as of a few days ago, say that they're already vaccinated. 30% more plan to get it, and 31% are either unvaccinated or don't plan to get it, or just saying no, I'm unsure what I'm going to do. So that 31% number here, they don't plan to get vaccinated or they're unsure about getting vaccinated. I think that number is held relatively steady, right? What we've seen historically, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those two groups of either vaccine skeptics or people who just don't know what they're going to do, it's been pretty consistent around 30% to 1/3 of us. What's interesting is that the folks who have already been vaccinated and still want to get it have crossed over. It just means that the folks that wanted to get their shots have been, and it's been a real kind of hockey stick growth of people that said a month ago, I've already been vaccinated to it's shot way up.
Yeah. And I think someone can maybe Google the latest stats, but I think we're at something like 155 million or so doses delivered. And I think the fully vaccinated population has now crossed over 30% if that number holds. So, So we asked people, what have you actually done in the last 2 weeks? So these are things that people have done in the last 2 weeks that maybe you wouldn't normally do if you were really, really terrified of doing things in public. So about half said they've gone shopping for non-essential items, but 42% said they've eaten inside of a restaurant dining room at this point. So the number, I mean, think about how low that number was just a few months ago, and we're starting to get back to some fairly healthy levels. Not a lot of people exercising in public. Is that just embarrassment? Maybe I would find that to be embarrassing. I think. I don't know.
Could be
I was
both.
actually going for a walk today, and then I started like doing these like circles with my arms, and it felt so silly to do that I thought I would be ridiculed, or someone would make like a TikTok video of like, look at this weird guy doing the strange motions in the neighborhood. That I stopped doing. I just kept walking instead. So, but the question is, do these numbers change if you compare the vaccinated population with the unvaccinated population? Are people who've been vaccinated more likely to engage in these activities? And it's sort of interesting, right? So you can see the numbers for the people that are already vaccinated versus the people that have not been vaccinated yet. And they're basically mostly the same, right? Sometimes they move a little bit in one direction versus the other, but it's nothing that we would call significant to the point that there's a real true difference between the behaviors of the vaccinated versus unvaccinated population, which I sort of found surprising. But Mark, I don't know, you might have a deeper look at the data that would give us more of a story.
Yeah, I took a look also at, we broke out as a crosstab just the folks who don't plan to get vaccinated at all, and they are significantly more likely to do more than half of these activities. They're more likely overall for all these activities, but significantly so for things like getting back to regular shopping, being outside without wearing a mask, and being part of kind of big groups or big crowds. Um, and so when I look at that, kind of just what that said to me is that we really, don't need to or shouldn't wait for some folks to get off the fence about, the folks that have made up their minds not to get vaccinated are already back to,
They've been doing it already.
yeah,
They've probably been doing it for a while as well, frankly.
yeah. But what was crazy that we haven't talked about yet, Jack, but the folks who have made up their mind not to get vaccinated, they also think that we have a lot longer to go in terms of when the pandemic will be over. So I don't know if that's just a resignation of, we're in for a long haul and I still just need to,
I don't even want to dig into potential theories as to why
yeah.
that the thing exists, but um, I guess it's not totally surprising. But would you characterize this as mostly good news then? I mean, I guess what I'm reading is that we don't need, in terms of behaviors to return, you don't need everyone to get vaccinated.
Right. I mean, I think that people are still going to be keeping their distance and wearing their masks. And so, I think that they're likely to venture out if they have made a vaccine plan and haven't followed through yet. It's not necessarily kind of a gating thing for them.
Yeah. So there is that question you just referenced. How much longer do you think the pandemic will last in this country? And quarter thinks it might be just a few more weeks or a couple of months. About 10% think that we'll be done with this for the most part by the end of fall. About a quarter thinks it'll take us through the end of the year. And then almost 40% say this will keep going into 2022 or longer. And again, I don't even want to try to guess why, but women seem to be more likely to think that this is going to be a longer term thing for whatever reason. If anyone has a theory that you think is particularly valid as to what's driving that, by all means offer up in chat. But I don't even want to dare guess what's contributing to that. So one thing that we've done is we've taken a lot of the reporting that we do, literally hundreds, if not thousands of reports, not just on COVID, but on every other topic imaginable. And we sort of compiled them into this new offering that we call Report Pro. I'm not going to spend really any time today talking about it in detail. We'll save that for the future. But I wanted to maybe highlight just a couple of insights that we learned from one of the hundreds and hundreds of reports that are available in Report Pro, which is basically an all-you-can-eat package that gives you access to everything that Data Central does in report format. And this is sort of a preview of some of the things that we'll be featuring in an upcoming report on healthiness. So what does it mean to be healthy? But one of the first questions that we asked is, what are the elements of well-being to you, right? If you just think about your entire life, what actually makes you feel well? And you can sort of see the numbers, right? Emotional and mental health is at the top, family relationships, physical health. then your finances, and then eat and drink is sort of right there in the middle of the pack, and you can see some of the other responses too. So eating and drinking is certainly an important part of it, but it's not the totality of well-being. What's interesting is if you look at how the direction of these things change a little bit depending on the type of person, or in this case, the particular generation that they belong to. Um, Boomers and Gen Xers are much more likely to value family relationships relative to their well-being. Obviously, your work or career matters most by the time you sort of make it to millennial age, and by the time you're a boomer, you're probably retired in many cases, so it doesn't matter quite as much. Things like physical health become basically more important once you get in for boomers than for other generations. It's sort of stable, then all of a sudden spikes with boomers. Spirituality, religion sort of increases as we move from one generation to the next. But the notion, and then social relationships, I guess we become more antisocial or something as we get older. I don't know. But the thing that is fairly flat and consistent across all groups is what I eat and drink. Now, there are different approaches to this, to be sure, but we should remember that food matters to each group as a major element of well-being. And the key is not to say, well, hey, it matters more to one group than another. It's just that different things within food matter to each group. But for all of them, it's pretty consistent up there in the mid to high 40s. So I want to ask you all, if you think about this notion of a healthy lifestyle, what makes for a healthy lifestyle for you personally? And I want to see how similar we are. So the question I'm going to show you here is, which one of the following is most important for a healthy lifestyle? And you could read the response choices yourself. Mark, Mike, what do you say?
Before the pandemic, it might have been different, where I might have said exercise, or I might have said eating right. Last year and a half, I would say managing stress.
And yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, personally for myself, it's definitely not avoiding alcohol. I love a good cocktail.
Well, we have tobacco and drugs in there too, so.
Yeah, that's true.
All fun things.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's like between managing stress and eating right.
Okay, well, we're coming up on a minute, and we have several hundred responses, so I'm gonna click this in. Let's see. Number one thing, exercise and staying active, actually by a pretty wide margin versus anything else on this list. And the question is, how much does this mirror the general population? So here's what people said. Interesting, right? We had exercise and staying active number one by far, but it's actually number four among the general population. And eating right is the number one thing to people on average. So maybe this is a characteristic of just like, what are some of the things that you wish you were doing more of in your life? Like maybe that's what, so maybe all of us or many of us, because we're in the food industry, are already doing a good job of relatively, eating right. But for lots of people, that isn't a thing. So I would look at this, right? Think of how important just like the notion of being healthy is. And the number one thing that people most say that contributes to that is eating right, which I think, given the gap that we see in this poll that we did here versus the general population, it's not crazy to suggest that it's maybe an indicator that a lot of people just don't think that they're eating right in the general public versus who we have in this webinar right now. There's a lot of, let's say, things we could do to help correct that for people, and frankly, it's an opportunity for businesses as well. So here are a couple other things that we learned. Part of this is sort of depressing, I actually think. Almost 40% of adults today say they have ongoing health issues of some sort. Of those adults that have an ongoing health issue, over 80% are taking prescription medication. We're a pretty medicated society. 30% take over-the-counter meds, and 23% try to treat their condition through their diet. I wonder if there's just not more we could do through diet that we don't have to be so reliant on as much prescription medication. But 40% having an ongoing health issue. And what are things that people trying to, I feel like this turned depressing. So we're going to try to avoid this from being depressing. So what are some things that people trying to actively avoid? Here you go. Sugar is the number one thing that people say they're trying to actively avoid in what they eat right now, over half. Then sodium, trans fats, carbohydrates, food additives. The thing that's interesting is I think a lot of people that say they are trying to avoid sugar and sodium probably don't know what an appropriate level of sugar or sodium actually would be. And we've done this experiment. You could ask people, hey, how many glasses of water should you have in a day? And people will give you an answer. How many calories should you have in a day? And a lot of people give you a reasonable answer. When you ask people, including those who say that they need to restrict their sodium, you ask them how many milligrams of sodium should you have in your diet? Very few people are able to give you a response or have any idea about it. So I don't know if part of this is just more education. Part of me feels like the education thing doesn't always work, because how many times have you picked up a food label and tells you exactly how much sodium an average person should have in their diet, but that information just doesn't take, or if there's something else. But these are big numbers of people actively avoiding having certain things. And as you can imagine, the numbers change depending on the consumer or the generation that they fall into, right? Boomers are much more likely than other groups to say, I'm trying to cut back on sodium or trans fats or saturated fats. Gen Zers don't really give a rat's ass about food additives. Right? That number is like they're not really trying to avoid food additives whatsoever. And then interestingly, boomers who typically are more likely to want to avoid other things are less likely than the other groups, right? Boomers are the yellow line, to say they're trying to avoid something like gluten in their diet. So a lot of this is generational and perhaps attitudinal in some ways, shaped by what our experiences in life has been. So we're going to pivot now, and here's a question for y'all in chat. Other than being entertainers, what do these three people have in common? And Mark, you could tell me if we get any good answers.
Yeah, people are getting the right answer.
Yeah, so these are, is this the future of restaurants? Maybe, right? So these are all, I guess you would call them restaurateurs at this point, or food entrepreneurs or something, but these folks all have virtual brands, whether it's Wiz Khalifa or DJ Pauly D or Mariah Carey and a whole host of others. So if you open up your favorite food apps, restaurant delivery apps, you'll find their stuff or the stuff of people like them, or their restaurants will be popping up on a food delivery app in the near future, coming soon. And that's why we wanted to go back to this conversation that we got cut short last time from a few episodes ago about what's happening with ghost kitchens and what's happening with virtual brands. What is the difference between them, and what prescriptions does Data Central have for these types of concepts? So just as a quick sort of review of the vernacular, to us, a ghost kitchen is an actual space that has no physical storefront, but it's an actual space that's used to prepare and send delivery food, right? It's an actual kitchen someplace, which is in contrast to this notion of a virtual brand, which is a delivery-only brand where food is prepared in an existing kitchen of some sort, right? So it could be prepared in a ghost kitchen, or it could be prepared out of a already running restaurant, let's say. And the thing that is actually, they're both interesting, but we wanted to focus on today is perhaps, I think, the more interesting one, and the one that's offering more explosive potential, is just this notion of a virtual brand. And they're really sort of going crazy, right? So just as recent as October, which is not that long ago, less than 6 months ago or so, we saw that 35% of consumers said they've at least heard of this thing that you'd call a virtual brand, or they've encountered one of them. By the time I got to March, which is just 5 months later, that number jumped from 35% to 50%, which is an explosive level of growth in such a short period of time. 23% of consumers in October had ordered from a virtual brand. That number is up to 34% in March, which is, again, explosive growth for something like this. And you could see that, this is clearly not just a generational thing, but we see much higher levels of use, at least as of March, right? This could change because things are so fast, not just among millennials and Gen Zers, but also from men versus women. There's a pretty pronounced difference there as well. And we think that virtual brands will just continue to be very explosive in the coming year and perhaps beyond. 2/3 of consumers think virtual brands are cool. 5 out of 6 are open to supporting, restaurants that close that might reopen as a delivery only virtual restaurant instead. A lot of restaurants for a while had excess kitchen capacity, although that's starting to fade as a lot of that traffic starts to return. And if you're thinking of doing this, the startup costs are pretty darn low to do something virtually versus starting an entirely new brick and mortar restaurant. So, despite all that potential positivity, we did want to offer up some cautions that if this is a big opportunity, and it seems like it probably is, there's so many different companies jumping in on this right now. I think there are some things that we need to be cautious of as an industry to make sure that we leverage the opportunity in the most beneficial way. Number one is that the overwhelming majority, 92% of consumers, say they want more transparency, or they just want transparency around virtual brands, right? You open up your restaurant delivery app, you see this thing that looks like a brand new cool restaurant in your area, you order the food, and then you find out later that actually it was just something made at a restaurant that you weren't a big fan of in the first place. 92% say 92% say, hey, please identify the restaurants listed on that delivery app that are just virtual brands that are actually another restaurant. And 73% say, I want you to also tell me what's the restaurant where the food's actually being prepared. Don't just tell me this thing is a virtual brand. Tell me where the food's being prepared out of as well. And the other thought, and I think you're starting to see a little bit more of this, is there is a risk that a lot of these virtual brands will be very, very different in the branding of them, or the celebrity that endorses them, or what have you. But a lot of the food offerings are at risk of starting to seem really, really similar at some point, right? And this may change, right? And we hope that it changes. But a lot of those virtual brands, I mean, if you look at the menus, the items are not particularly unique, right? You have a lot of wing concepts, which is great because everyone loves wings, but they tend to be the same types of wings, or same, traditional flavors, for instance. And as the number of virtual brands starts to grow and grow and grow, a lot of them may just start looking the same to the consumers. So I think we featured Mr. Beast Burger, which has done really well in a previous webinar. And here's the actual menu for Mr. Beast Burger. It's great. All these things sound great, but imagine that you have 300 different virtual brands that are all focused on burgers at some point. Unless those menus start doing something a little bit more interesting, they're all going to feel pretty similar, right? If you look at the burgers here, yeah, they're all, pretty traditional. They're the burgers that you would put in that ubiquity stage of our menu adoption cycle, the stuff that everyone loves and has been around for a while. It works great. And it's fantastic if you have a few brands that do this, but when every brand down the road might be doing it, we're going to need more innovation to come into virtual menus. So that's just something we would caution against. If you are working for a company that's looking to launch a virtual brand, go beyond just the basic traditional favorites. You're going to need it to stand out at some point. And lastly, we found that people have interest in different types of virtual brands, and there's a real nuance here. So we asked people, what type of virtual brand would you be interested in? A lot of people said, I'd be interested in a virtual brand tied to a charity. I've not seen one of those yet, but I guess it's possible, right? Maybe that's just like a very hard brand to birth, but people say, hey, if you had a virtual brand that was linked to a charity in some way, great. But I don't think we've seen one of those yet. Celebrity chefs, virtual brands that are tied to like movies that people love, specific entertainers, social influencers, athletes. Not as much love for virtual brand tied to a politician, but I actually think that would work in this day and age because politicians have sort of become like celebrities in a way too. So here's the challenge in the remaining 5 minutes that we have. Can you and chat come up with a clever politician-based virtual restaurant brand, right? Pelosi's Pierogies, that type of thing, and let's see how creative all of us are. So, what we learned is if you're gonna do a virtual brand, there are certain things that work for certain types of people, right? So, if you want to do something based on a movie like the Star Wars Creature Cantina virtual brand, those things might work well with the younger generations. It might even work okay with Gen X, but boomers, not as crazy about the idea. Like even if you did the Casablanca virtual brand, it probably is not going to play that great with boomers. Charity though is an interesting thing. Like there's actually strong interest in a virtual brand tied to a charitable cause across all consumer types. Now, obviously that charitable cause is going to differ based on who that consumer is or which generation they fall into. But this seems like some unexplored territory right now that no one's really cracked the code on yet. But we invite the creative of you to explore. And then finally, celebrity chefs. The numbers are pretty similar across the board, but the celebrity chef, him or herself, that you'd want to sort of use is going to be different depending on who you want to target. Because even though the numbers look the same for Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, and boomers, that's the general notion of celebrity chefs. If we said, hey, let's do something for a particular chef, the numbers would be very, very wildly different from one generation to the next. And that's actually, to us, the real insight around virtual brands is that you could target customer audiences with far greater laser precision with the virtual brand that's super, super specific in its endorser or its mission or just the personality that's behind it than you ever could with a brick and mortar restaurant, right? Because, you probably couldn't make the Star Wars Creature Cantina restaurant work in a brick and mortar way, but you could do it online. And if you did it online, you can get to a very, very targeted audience. So we think this is a big opportunity still, and it should be explored. And our caution again is, let's make sure we keep these things interesting, not just from the perspective of the branding itself, but with the menu too. The menus are starting to look a little bit similar right now, and a little differentiation will help this trend continue. If you have more questions about any of the things that we looked at today, a lot of these insights can be found in this new thing that we have called Report Pro. We'll be telling you more about it in the weeks and months ahead. But if you're working with us with Data Central already, ask your Data Central person. We'd be happy to share some more information on how you can get all this stuff in a true all-you-can-eat platform. With that, we have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks. Brand new topics that we'll be covering. Please do us a favor and share this with all of your colleagues. Invite more people to come. We're only as good as the community itself. And with that, I would just invite you to reach out to Data Central if you're not working with us already. We have a ton of great stuff. It really is best in class, and we'd love to work with you.